Welcome to the Risk and Repeat podcast, episode number 247. I'm Rob Wright, Security News Director at Informatech Target, and I am here with Senior Security News Writer Alex Kalafi. Alex, welcome.
Thanks, Rob.
How are you doing on this frigid Wednesday, February 19th?
I am well. Security is not. Okay. No one's getting active. Well, plenty of people are getting pwned,
I'm
I'm sure,
sure.
but
Yeah,
there's no colonial pipeline right now, so that's good.
right.
Um, but I worry, I guess, about how many members of CISA Doge can shave off before we
Ugh.
have another one.
Yeah. I know we said we in the previous episode uh, on CISA and what was going to happen down the road. Uh, we had mentioned we're going to keep an eye on that, and we are. And some things have been happening with our cybersecurity agency. There's been some, I guess, targeted layoffs. Is rumored to be more. Maybe I should have expressed a little bit more concern, a little bit more pessimism on that previous episode back in January, because it seems like a number of people are concerned about the direction that's going. Um, Not great.
hmm
But another topic that we are discussing today is an ongoing story that we've covered quite a bit here at Informatech Target across multiple cybersecurity publications, and that is Salt Typhoon,
hmm
the Chinese nation-state threat group that has been a real thorn in the side of the U.S. governments, U.S. government agencies, U.S. enterprises, U.S. law enforcement, intelligence, et cetera, et cetera. They first rose to, I guess, prominence last October, I believe it was, when the Wall Street Journal first revealed in a exclusive story that Salt Typhoon was targeting or had potentially compromised a number of
hmm
US-based telecom and internet service providers. That a follow-up story about how the threat group had accessed the law enforcement compliance or law enforcement request systems of these telecom providers. So basically, they got into the parts of the telecom carriers' networks where that deal with like wiretapping and court orders and all that stuff. And that's not good.
Mm-mm.
Uh, Alex, you recall there was a big to do about those attacks, big response. There was a lot of concern about whether or not the threat actor still had access. We knew that they got into AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, Lumen. We're still kind of not sure who the other handful of telecom providers are. Those companies have not been named, which I find a little odd, or have not been confirmed at least. And it wasn't until last month, I think, that some of the companies, some of the telecom carriers say that they were confident that they had successfully evicted these nation state threat actors from the networks. They no longer had access. Great. But there was deep concern about these attacks and what level of data and information the threat actors had obtained while they were inside these telecom networks, to the point where CISA and the FBI had a few months ago put out guidance telling high value targets, high value individuals, government officials, politicians, etc. Basically, don't trust your communications channels. Like, use encrypted comms outside of the telecom carriers if you want to
hmm
exchange sensitive information, which is really just a mind blower. Uh, Not good stuff. And we had a few weeks of, I guess, reprieve, where we weren't having panics or freakouts, or the news cycle for Salt Typhoon had kind of slowed.
Yeah.
And then lo and behold, last week, Salt Typhoon returns to the news, and you covered it for us at Tech Target Security.
Hmm.
So I'll let you sort of summarize what happened with this latest installment of the Salt Typhoon news cycle.
Yeah, good initial summary, though I would add that on our personal side, something that if you didn't say it on the podcast, you definitely said to Ariel and I in the last, I don't know, several weeks before any of this happened was like, I wonder if Salt Typhoon is actually out of these networks.
Yeah,
Was something you were saying, not necessarily T-Mobile or Verizon or any of those initial companies themselves, but just I wonder, like we heard about this stuff and then we stopped hearing about it. But the question you asked astutely was, I wonder if they're still up to their tricks, and it sounds like they are because according to this research from Recorded Future earlier this month, they described a campaign from Salt Typhoon, which they tracked as Red Mike. I'll have a question about that a little later. Actually, no, I'll ask you a question. I'll
sure,
ask you this
sure,
question now.
sure. Yep,
When a threat actor is designated all of these different names,
yeah.
it's silly, fine, whatever. My question is this a case of a vendor going, we're going to put our own stamp on this investigation and it's a PR thing? Or is it, we just have our own little quirky internal tracking system? This isn't strictly for PR. People just get carried away with the names sometimes. We're doing our own thing and it just happens to get intermingled with Salt Typhoon, which we know is the accepted name.
Yeah.
Like which of the two is this?
I think it's almost entirely the latter in terms of having internal tracking and identification and taxonomy for their research, for their threat intelligence, for all this stuff. Um,
Hmm.
you can say, and I've complained about it. We've written about this. We wrote a story on this on threat actor taxonomy. I want to say during COVID, maybe
Hmm.
21, maybe 22, about the confusing elements at play here and how this all works. And but it's really difficult to get all these organizations to agree upon one name, especially for big ones where there's a lot of threat activity and they're identifying it and tracking it in different. You have multiple vendors that have identified the same threat activity and think that they are, first to sort of put the stake in the ground. And they're not aware of the other, the vendors and research that are looking at the same threat activity. I mean, and I'm sure they can guess that the same stuff is being examined by other cybersecurity vendors, but yeah, it's hard. I mean, it's one of those things that makes this a little bit more like every time, the SolarWinds hackers are referenced, it's APT 28 or Cozy Bear or um it's just yeah, a midnight blizzard, and it's annoying.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't think it's for PR purposes. I really do think that these guys, they have their own internal threat tracking and not just how they track the threat activity, but how they attribute it and whether or not they really want to like, or is this just threat activity that we're naming, or are we really tying it to a specific threat group that we've previously identified or that we know has been identified by other organizations? It's there's a lot of nuance there. So,
Yeah, that's helpful and that sounds right because sometimes when like this happens I get like annoyed because I'm like we already know them as this, whatever.
yep.
But then I'm like no, that's probably not what's going on here. So what you said is makes a lot of sense. Anyway, Recorded Future reported that as part of a campaign that was tracked between December and January, they saw Salt Typhoon, as part of the threat campaign, target more than 1,000 Cisco devices globally, which ultimately resulted in, as they tracked, five telecom companies getting breached, which includes a U.S. telecom and internet service provider and a US based affiliate of a UK telecom provider. Five companies got hit as part of this, and they called attention to a privilege escalation vulnerability from 2023, CVE 2023 20198, a vulnerability found in the web user interface feature in the Cisco iOS XE software. Is that one of their device operating systems?
I mean, essentially, it's software in these edge devices that, yeah,
Okay. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. And then they also exploited an associated privilege escalation vulnerability, CVE 2023 20273. Red Mike, Salt Typhoon, reconfigures the device, adding a generic routing encapsulation tunnel for persistent access. So they tracked um, target targeted attempts against 1,000 Cisco devices. Five of them were successful. The real headline, outside of all the technical details of this post, is that even though Salt Typhoon fell out of the news cycle for a little bit, they didn't stop working.
No, they didn't.
Which to me, my takeaway from that, and I'm curious if you have the same one, is, and I don't strictly mean to veer into politics here, but if the new presidential administration intends to dismantle a lot of federal employment as we know it, which CISA is wrapped up in.
Mm,
If Salt Typhoon hasn't really been taken care of or handled, and they're still targeting telecom carriers to get, as we know,
hmm
things like wiretap data,
hmm
is it really smart to slash at CISA? Of all, I mean, there's a lot of things that shouldn't be cut, maybe, but
Sure.
CISA is definitely one that shouldn't be. I feel like if Salt Typhoon hasn't really slowed down, is that a fair thing to say
I
here?
I was going to bring this up later, but let's do it now. Yeah, I think it's the timing is not great, and that's putting it lightly. I mean, this is something that we know that the CSRB, Cybersecurity Safety Review Board, is part of, DHS/CISA. That was essentially disbanded when they terminated all of the third party advisory board members, so non-government, non-CISA, DHS related government officials that were serving on the board, from different vendors, different companies, different parts of private industry. And so when they terminated those positions, the CSRB work essentially stopped. And they were in the midst of looking at these telecom breaches from last fall and
Breaches that were ongoing,
breaches that were literally like, yes, I mean, I think
not
it
a
was
post-mortem.
right.
Well, this
Yes,
genre of activity, I guess.
yes. AT&T and I think Verizon were two that said we're confident we evicted them, but who knows about the others. So yeah, so that work it has been stopped. That is a concern. I guess you could look at this and say, okay, the CSRB, all they're going to do is, it's not, it's an advisory board. This isn't, the Mueller report. This isn't like a special prosecutor out there calling these guys under oath. But at the same time, go back to what I said about CSRB and the Microsoft report. That report was really revealing. The people that have argued that the CSRB didn't really do anything are totally and outrageously wrong because we'd still, to this day, without the CSRB report, we'd still be under the impression that Microsoft had successfully determined the root cause of the Storm 0558 attack with the stolen consumer signing key. They did not. They did not. It was a theory that they were unable to prove. They had no evidence, proving that that was the root cause. And they would have been allowed to just float that out there and say case closed. And uh, that, like I said, that wasn't the case. So there may be elements of these breaches that are really, really important that we don't know about, but we may never learn because the CSRB is not around to probe it more. And not only that, but to the earlier point about the additional personnel and folks over at CISA that have been eliminated. Who knows how many of them might have touched an incident like this or series of incidents like these. It's hard to tell. I know that there was reports that it was a lot of election security folks that had been put on administrative leave or had been let go. So yeah, it's it certainly makes you question the timing of a lot of these cuts and upheaval in these agencies because this is really bad. And I don't think anyone was under the impression that China had suddenly just stopped trying to gain access to our communications infrastructure and these telecom providers and had just given up. I don't think anybody really thought that. I guess what's really troubling about this to me, beyond the CSRB and CISA and federal government response, is like just how easy it was for these guys to get back into some of these telecom providers. Well, I say back in. We don't know if there's any overlap between the previous companies and the ones mentioned in this recorded future report. But they exploited old vulnerabilities, known
Mhm.
vulnerabilities, and not just known vulnerabilities. I get it. There's known vulnerabilities that are out there all the time that people kind of just forget to patch. There's stuff in Microsoft Patch Tuesdays that doesn't get patched for months, if not years. These were two CVEs that were prominent 0 days under attack, and not just targeted attacks. They were under widespread exploitation. There was a lot of press about these. We covered it. Every cybersecurity news outlet covered it. And for companies in the telecom space, regardless of where they're situated, whether they're UK, here, overseas, to to know that Salt Typhoon is out there doing this stuff and that they
Mhm.
have edge devices that haven't been patched, Cisco edge devices that haven't been patched for really well-known 0 days, I thought was pretty depressing. How'd you feel?
Troubled, yeah. The blame game is really complicated with this one, right? Because it's I don't know. Do you blame um the fact that the CSRB was shut down? Do you um it's actually like pr weirdly comparable maybe to a lot of the stuff that's happening with airplanes falling out of the sky, where there's like eight different entities that need to be blamed, but
Yeah.
it's hard to tell exactly how much. And I kind of feel the same way with this, where Salt Typhoon doing what they're doing so egregiously. Yes, they're threat actors. Yes, a lot of defenders are doing their best. And it also seems like there's like three or four different points in this chain that weren't working, that haven't been working appropriately. I don't know, is that fair to say?
Yeah, but so here's what upsets me. This isn't, I'm not upset with recorded future Cisco or
No.
this is sort of big picture. This is just state of the world. Like this is where we're at. Frustration. So one of the things I know, I should say, you wrote the story for Tech Target Security. I wrote
Mhm.
a similar story for cybersecurity dive, which is now also part of Informa Tech Target, along with dark reading. I've been helping out over there with our colleagues. They've been down a person, so you know, and when I was working on this story, the first thing I kept thinking of was like, man, this isn't a SolarWinds hack. This isn't some elaborate supply chain attack. This is this is just a threat actor, a nation state threat actor doing something very simple. Did they
Hmm.
patch these edge devices that are exposed to the internet? They're public facing. Are they patched or not? Oh, they're not patched? Well, let's jump into the network. I mean, it's really not that much more complicated. So if that is what's happening, and again, these companies know that they have a target on their back for a nation state threat actor on the level of Salt Typhoon, it's just really troubling that that a 0 day vulnerabilities.
Hmm.
Again, that I can't stress that enough, that we're under attack, that we're very prominent, high profile, covered to
Hmm.
death. Um, that was the way they got in. And when Recorded Future, to their credit, I asked them very simply, be surprised? Be surprised that this is how they got in, and they, look, the statement from one of the researchers was very diplomatic, patch management and application and deployment is really tough, especially with large enterprises, thousands of endpoints and workstations and network devices. It's challenging, and effective and safe patch deployment involves lots of steps. And I'm paraphrasing here, but this is generally what they said. You got to test, you got to validate, you have to have planned downtime for a lot of, edge devices and network devices and so on and so forth. You got to adjust workflows and make adjustments to operations and all this. I, I, good for them for saying that because they're right. I mean, the recorded future is right. At the same time, if we can't get 0 days like this patched a year and a half, 2 years down the road, then we're utterly defenseless. Like
Fair.
we're utterly defenseless because all somebody needs to do is do a simple internet scan. Is this firewall patched or not? Is this VPN patched or not? Oh, it's not. Boom. Green light. Let's go. Pwnage time.
Hmm.
And that's depressing. That is depressing. You've got CISA and the FBI putting out guidance like, hey guys, here's all the things that you need to do to protect your communications, to secure your communications. Great. What is it? What does it matter if the telecommunications provider isn't, isn't patching these bugs? Again, you don't have to patch every bug, but I feel like 0 days that are under widespread exploitation, that's pretty important. And I'll ask you, Alex, how
Hmm.
confident are you that no one has used those bugs previously? That no one thought to like, hey, I'm going to scan this telecom provider. I'm going to scan this big enterprise, see if they patched this widespread exploited 0 day, 0 days plural for Cisco, because I know they're running their devices because I can see it right here with this scan. I'm not confident that this is the first time it's been used.
Maybe this isn't a comparable example. Maybe it is, but I can't help but think about a story I wrote yesterday about a Palo Alto Networks
Yeah.
vulnerability.
Hmm.
Um there was some business about a POC uh or a proof of concept exploit getting published by um the vendor who discovered it, it asset note, and then there was some word from Palo Alto Networks. It was in their advisory saying that uh the POC was used by threat actors.
Hmm.
So I reached out to Gray Noise, a vendor which does scans of for things like exposed instances of software and
Yep.
hardware, whatever. Um, and a researcher for Gray Noise told me that exploitation efforts began, to their knowledge, within hours after the POC was released, which
Hmm.
is a long-winded way of saying I know it's two different vendors, two different products, whatever.
Hmm.
But if this Cisco vulnerability was highly publicized for quite some time before we found out it was being used in this instance, your point is fair that it might not have just been Salt Typhoon
Yeah.
using them.
And I feel like that's the kind of thing, the unpatched instances for those two CVEs and why they weren't patched is the kind of thing that I think would be in a hypothetical CSRB report about the telecom breaches and the Salt Typhoon attacks. Um, Maybe we'll see something on that down the road. Who knows? But
Hmm.
it's it's troubling. And again, try not to be too pessimistic. I don't want to say we're defenseless, but I just think we have to take this stuff a little more seriously as as a country, as an industry, as I don't know. I mean, I think we have to wake up and basically understand that like the Salt Typhoons of the world are not going to stop.
Hmm.
The midnight blizzard, Salt Typhoon, name your adversary. North Korea, Iran, Russia, China. It really doesn't matter. And like either we're going to do something about it or we're not. And when I say do something about it, I'm not talking about, you know, drones and sending in the Delta Force or whatever to take out foreign hackers, any of that silly crap. I'm just talking about like basic steps. I know that patching is hard. I get it. Uh, and I know that nobody wants downtime, but the alternative is we're leaving truck-size holes for these guys to get into the networks. And it just seems like if we can't do that, if we can't do, like, we know how many alerts, how many advisories, how many uh, PSAs, warnings have we got from security vendors, government agencies, uh, across the board the last few years, edge devices, network edge devices, public facing devices and appliances like this are widely targeted by a variety of threat actors. If we can't get these secure, there's, we might as well be defenseless. And if that's putting too much on the telecom providers, which are technology companies, then guilty as charged. Throw me in the hot take jail. I'm ready. I want a lawyer. I just like just make it harder. If they need to do something like a SolarWinds hack, like something super elaborate and just I guess at the time unprecedented, fine. They do it, you respond, you learn from it, you tip your hat, you say never again, and you do everything you can to stop it. This is just like Groundhog Day. This is just like, oh, another firewall, another firewall or VPN or network security appliance exposed to the internet that was unpatched. Like, how many times? When are we going to be sick of it? When are we going to demand more? When are we going to do something? And I know the federal agencies out there, they have the known exploited vulnerability catalog, and there's rules for agencies to get these applied and patched and updated to close off these giant holes that hackers are just looking at, and salivating over. But I don't know, got to do more. Got to do more. Got to understand that like we're losing. Like that's what's happening right now. So, not to get too pessimistic.
No, I think you're appropriately pessimistic.
It's like I know we're probably doing a lot of things overseas that the government and the NSA don't want us to know about. I think some things just popped up in the news recently in the last day. But like we've got to defend our own infrastructure, defend our own organizations and own government agencies. And I think it may be time to just admit that what we're doing is not working. We're losing. We can't just sit here and say, please patch. 0 days out there, it's under exploitation. Please patch. Oh, you haven't patched a year and a half later? Well, patching, please patch again. It's not going to work. It's not. It's insanity. Got to do something. What? I don't know. I suppose if
Mhm.
I knew, I would be in office somewhere, but I'm not. So, um, we'll see. But yeah, I guess RIP for the CSRB for now. It would have been an interesting report to read, Alex, but uh, I'm sure on next episode we'll probably have some updates on CISA and what's been going on over there. Um,
Yeah, I would be surprised if what we talk about next isn't CISA.
yeah, but I appreciate all the time and work you put in on the Salt Typhoon stuff, and thanks for covering that.
Hey, thanks, Rob.
And I'll say thank you to the readers and listeners of Informa Tech Target and the Risk and Repeat podcast. I'm Rob Wright, and we'll see you next time.